Hey folks, me again, Tom Moto-Resto LLC, Braden, Florida. Thanks for tuning back in. I got a quick video I'm going to talk to you about in regards to motorcycle wheel bearings. I'm working on a 2006, I think it is. 2006 Yamaha XT225 for a customer. And I really needed to do fuel work and things like that, which are already done. I'm kind of doing some last minute stuff. And although this wasn't part of the job, I was curious about why the rear brake was so far out of adjustment, in other words, pulled up. And I wanted to pull the rear wheel off to examine the brake shoes because it's a drum brake, as you can see. They are worn, but it's not like terrible. So one thing I always do if I pull a motorcycle wheel off, doesn't matter what I'm doing it for, whether it's tires or something else, stick my finger in the hole. There's a joke there somewhere. And I try to turn the bearing. And I want to make sure that it's smooth and it's not frozen, and just, quick check. Doesn't matter what I'm working on, like I said. And this one, you can see, won't turn. Well, it'll turn, but I shouldn't say won't, but it's really hard to turn. Alright, so once I saw that, what I wanted to do was I wanted to look at the axle, because I'm wondering if these are seasoned. It's been actually spinning on the axle itself. And in this case, there's not a lot of evidence of that, so I'm not too worried about that. So what you have to understand with these wheel bearing setups in motorcycles is you have to kind of wrap your head around how the forces are applied when the axle bolt and the nut on the other side of it is tightened up, okay? Or if it just goes into the side of the swing arm. Some of them are like that, are threaded. Either way, when you're putting an axial load on this assembly through the axle, of course, hence the name, you're essentially drawing everything together. Now, what prevents this from taking this bearing and trying to push the inside of the bearing against the outside of the bearing race, these are just regular ball bearings, is a spacer. So inside here, there is a spacer. Let me turn it up a little bit this way. Inside the hub, there's a spacer that goes across between the two bearings. All right? So you got one bearing here, and you got one bearing here on the sprocket side. And the same situation applies if I try to go this way. I can get it to move, but it's super hard. That should be easy. So the first thing I'm going to look at when I counter something like this, and you should too, is whether or not it looks all crusty and corroded. That would be obviously a sign that they need to be replaced. Now, I don't really see that on these. This one right here doesn't look too bad. This side has a seal, which I have in stock. I'm going to replace. And so this is, of course, the sprocket side. This one has a seal. On this side, does not, except for the bearing being sealed. Drum brake assembly goes here. So the only thing that's really protecting it from water intrusion and corrosion is just that brake assembly. There's no seal on that at all. Some of them might have a little felt washer, other things to keep stuff from getting in, but this one does not. So the next thing I did was I want to check to make sure that this bearing, since it don't have a seal, isn't all crusty inside there. It looks a little on the outside here, so it's suspect. And I'm thinking, well, maybe this bearing is bad. Let's take a look. What you can do is you can very carefully get underneath these covers with a screwdriver and pop them off. Just like that. Try not to bend them. This is kind of metal. It's a very thin metal with rubber on top of it. And you can see that bearing is fine. There's nothing wrong with that bearing. It's got grease in it. It's not corroded inside of it. So what's causing this? Well, I'll tell you what's causing it. It was installed incorrectly. It's probably been that way for a long time. And the reason why, again, is that force that goes across this way. Okay, that axial force. Now, there's no axle in there right now. So what's causing the force? Well, when you drive a bearing into this is essentially kind of a press fit, but more like an interference fit for these bearings into these housings. When you drive one in, you're driving it in from the outside edge. You never drive one in from the inside edge. So they're using a bearing driver or something which captures this outside edge, which is correct. The appropriate way to do it. Trouble is, the spacer inside here is usually, depending on the bike and so forth, not necessarily exactly the right length. Sometimes they're a little bit long. So what happens is if you drive this from the outside in, the other side bearing is already seated, and I'll cover that here in a second why that's important. You're essentially going to push the outside down first to where you think it's seated, but it's actually hitting the spacer first before it seats in the shoulder. Let me illustrate what I'm talking about with these little learning aids here. I got a couple of bearings here. This is obviously not the correct spacer, but okay, so here's a spacer that's already been put in on, let's say, this sprocket side. So that's where it's going to be. Then you drop your spacer in, and then you put your other bearing in, and you tappy tap 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 from the outside of the bearing. Now if you're hitting it from the outside of the bearing and it seats on that spacer, one more hit, it's going to compress it. You're going to essentially put a axial load, a preload on it. It's going to be wanting to force the bearing this way and this way because of that preload. Again, the shoulder where this sits may only be a few thousandths away, but this thing is a little proud of that, and when you seat these together and you hit it from the outside edge, that puts that axial preload on it. Now how we can verify that is, you can see right there on the inside, let's see if I can zoom you up a little bit, you see that little edge? That is the inside edge of the bearing contacting the spacer. So that's fine. So it is in line with the axle, the bearing ID that is, because it's concentric with it because the axle is installed, all right? But what you should be able to do is you should be able to reach a screwdriver in and move this around, back and forth, side to side. There's a certain amount of play in there that has to be there, because in order to drive these bearings out, they will get driven out from the inside because it's assumed that you're going to replace them anyway if you're driving them out. And you have to move that spacer to the side. The spacer has to go to the side of the bearing, and I'm showing you this way. So it goes over to the side a little bit so you can actually reach down inside that spacer and capture that edge. If you can't move this thing back and forth, or at least easily, that bearing is not in correctly. So what we're going to have to do on this one is, we're going to have to use something with a little more rigidity to it and try to get that spacer over to the side, and we're going to reach down from the other side and we're going to tappy tap tap this one just a little bit, even on the inside of that race, to push that out and then feel this. What we should have is, we should just have it contacting the inside of these bearings. So when you take the spacer and you reach in there, it should be, you can just feel it moving like this. So you don't want it away, because then it'll do the opposite thing. When you crank it down, it'll pull against it. And you don't want it too tight like this, because it'll be pushing it away. So we just want to feel it move back and forth. And then we know that that is in contact with it. When you pull up on the bolt, it won't be overly compressing the bearings because there's a little space between the bearings and the spacer. And they won't be, distracted already or compressed outwards because of what I already explained in regards to installation. So what I need to do is I need to get something off camera here. I'll try that to move this out of the way. And then I'll show you what we're going to do to try to get this to work properly. I can't leave it like this. This is just no good. This is going to tear this self apart. So who speaks like that? So then we'll try to get this repaired. And I'll show you what I mean as we go. All right, I got a long bar, a drift bar that I've used previously for driving bearings, either out or whatever I'm doing. And I can get in here and I'll displace this over to the side. Oh wow, that's tight. All right, that's all we're going to get. Now if you look down in here, you can kind of see that it's out of center now, and that's what you want. You see how it's a little bit out of center? So you can see that side, so we're going to have to tappy tap tap over here and see if we can get it moving. As soon as we get it moving, it's going to be a lot easier to do. So now we're going to turn her over. Okay, so the spacer is pushed this way. So I have a little edge over here because it's moved out of center. So remember, the spacer is between the two. So if you can picture it, this is the way the spacer is going. The spacer is now not center, it's over to this side a little bit. So because it's over on that side, I have a little edge on the inside of that. Okay, so what you want to do is get a drift in here, and you can feel it. You make sure that if you're doing this, you're absolutely in the spot that you need to be, because sometimes these hubs have features in them like aluminum shoulders and stuff. You start banging on those, you end up cracking them or breaking them. But I can kind of feel, you can hear it, that is metal to metal right there. And I'm trying to get a best purchase I can, which is not going to be easy. But sometimes you just got to kind of work it. Try to get this thing moved a little bit more. Boy, that is a tough one. It is really in there. So I'm trying to get that spacer over a little bit more. I'm going to try to work at it a little bit more here. Now, I may have to grind or make another. Yeah, I'm not able to get a good purchase on that. Alright, let me look for something else. I took a drift and I put a little angle on it, ground a little angle on it, because this hole is so small for this axle, you can't really get in there and get an angle on it to hit down at it. That angle, it just compounds the angle that you can stick it into, and sometimes that works. So I'm going to get down in here and just try to get a purchase on it. Aha, see, that felt really good. Alright, got a couple of good hits on it now. Alright, so see how nice and easy that spins now. Check the other side. Yeah, perfect. Okay, so now we're going to test it again. Like I said, you can see inside there that little spacer. You can see that it's kind of moving back and forth pretty easily. We don't want that. We just want it to drag a little bit. So if I do that, you can kind of see it. This one just doesn't move very far, but you can feel them. Again, the solution to this is we're just going to tap it down the other way a little bit. And we're going to get that to just rub. In other words, where it's just movable back and forth and you can feel it rubbing against that bearing in there. We certainly couldn't leave it like that. That is just too much. Alright, so I got a 27 millimeter socket. And we're just going to tap it down back this way. A little bit. Just get that where it still turns, but this thing you can move easily. See, it's perfect. Now I can really kind of show you what I'm talking about because it's moving correctly. Alright, so you can see that spacer. Now we're going to move it just with a screwdriver. If I can get you in here and the screwdriver. You see it just moves with a little bit of resistance. See it? Folks, that's what you want. You don't want it slopping around, and you don't want it the way it was where you couldn't turn a damn thing. You want it just touching the inside of the bearings. Because it can't pull it together anymore because it's already contacting that, and you don't have preload pushing the bearings apart already because this was driven in too far. Now the last part I'll cover here is we don't generally, I don't at least, generally adjust this side of the bearing, okay? Because this side is the side that has the offset, correct offset. The drive side you want to seat. You want to seat that drive side all the way in to wherever the engineers decided to be inside this wheel as far as that shoulder goes where this bearing seats. So you seat this one in, adjust the other one. Because even though it might only be a couple thousandths, and it probably won't make a damn bit of difference, to me it's good practice to seat the drive side, which is the aligned side, whether it's, with the chain and so forth on these chain and sprocket bikes, and then tweak the other side to make this do what it's supposed to do. So right now this is turning perfectly. It's not grinding, it's not doing anything bad. So I'd be confident putting this back in and there'd be no problem whatsoever. Alright, so the take-home message in this is these bearings are supposed to turn pretty freely. And when they're that tight, either from the bearing itself being compromised or that compression outwards, that axial load outwards, if you will, from being compressed into that spacer too tight, it ain't right. Now this bike don't have many miles on it, so that's probably why it hasn't failed. Would it have failed in a short period of time? Maybe, maybe not. The number one thing is these seals that go in here. And the wheel seals are the things that fail and then cause the bearings, even with this cap on it, the seal bearings, allegedly, seal bearings, they're never sealed. They get compromised with dirt and water and then crap out, all right? This is the spacer for this side, the sprocket side, which naturally I'll clean up, yuck. And this is the seal for that side that I'm replacing. And the problem again with these are, there's really not a whole lot right there that's holding on to that spacer. And when you get dirt and grime and stuff in here, it acts as an abrasive, and then it'll sometimes machine a groove into the spacer. It's particularly bad on those aluminum or composite material spacers you find on some other bikes, like DRZ 400s in particular is bad about that. But this is steel. There's no groove in it, but this seal is just not on there very well. Here's the old seal. Here's a new seal. And you can see that this has got a lot more extension into the center than this one. So yeah, definitely replace these at a regular basis. It'll save your bearings. Just good practice to change these out periodically after a few years of doing tires or something like that. If you're into the rear wheel or the front wheel, consider ordering those as well and cleaning this stuff really good, greasing the crap out of it as much as you need to at least, and then put it all back together and you got peace of mind. Now, if I was going to drive the bearing out to replace it, I naturally would not drive it only from one side. What I mean by that is, now that we can move the spacer back and forth pretty easily inside here, we can reach down with a drift and we can tap it in this way, then that way, then this way, and that way, and move it out. The reason why it works just hitting it one side to move it a little bit is because the bore, as you can see on this side, is tight to the bearing, so it's keeping the bearing straight. But if you were going to remove it and only hitting on one side, it'll eventually start to cock, and you could also damage the bore. So hitting it just from one side like that is only to get the thing loosened up where we can move the spacer back and forth, manipulate to the point where, again, if we were driving the bearing out, I can go back and forth, and go around kind of in like a 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 9 o'clock, and then back to 12 o'clock that way. As much as possible. Drive it out evenly, and then you're golden. So as far as the offset goes, from this side, I like to do it that way, where the offset is maintained on the side that has an alignment that is engaged with, of course, the chain and the sprocket on the front. But if it's only a few thousand, it probably won't make a damn bit of difference. But I just like to do it that way. But I can tell you for sure that the manufacturer did not design these bearings to be that tight and almost completely seized up. They're supposed to turn freely. As you can see right now, we're doing pretty well, and that's what we got. So that's what I wanted to cover in this video. That's it. Hope you enjoyed. Hope you learned something. Hope you got something out of it. Subscribe, ring the bell, like the video. Catch you on the next one. And remember, don't just restore bearings, return them. And remember, guys, don't just repair bearings, restore them and everything else. Remember, guys, don't just repair, restore. And we just did that. And remember, don't just repair these, restore them. And that's just what we did. We restored this to proper operating condition. Catch you on the next video. Thanks for watching.